A couple of Atari 2600 cartridges that I'm definitely looking for. Keystone Capers. I absolutely love Keystone Capers. That's the one where you are like a police officer and you are trying to catch the criminal before he gets out of the store. For some reason, he's already in a striped suit, so clearly this guy got out of prison and went straight back to robbing department stores instantaneously. Like, he didn't even stop to change his clothes.
This is the Atari 2600 Plus. It is another one of those miniature consoles like the NES Mini or Super Nintendo Mini or, you know, the PlayStation Mini. I could go on. You get the idea. This thing is weird. And whenever I think about it, the phrase that comes to mind is, who asked for this thing? That being said, it's got some features that are incredibly cool. And even though I wasn't looking for something like this, I'm so glad that Atari, or the people that now own Atari, decided to make this thing, because it doesn't just play a series of games that are pre-installed on it. It comes with a cartridge. Yeah, a cartridge. Comes with a cartridge that has 10 games on it. We'll talk about that cartridge in a little bit. But the thing that separates this from all the others out there is that this plays the old cartridges on it. You know, you can walk into a retro store and buy a game for the Atari 2600, probably on the cheap, because those things are from the 1970s and 80s and ain't nobody looking for those. And you can plug it into this thing and maybe have some fun with it. Speaking of which, let's go buy some games.
So one thing that you all might not know about me is I live in a very, very rural area, and that means there's no retro game shops in my town. I mean, let's be honest, there's no game shops in my town. Hell, there's probably hardly any shops in my town. So if you want to go shopping, it's going to entail probably 40 minutes in the car both ways. Not 40 minutes there and back. It's 20 minutes there, 20 minutes back, in order to do any kind of shopping. So we are headed to the nearest retro game store, and we're going to see if we can find some Atari 2600 cartridges, maybe some Atari 5400 cartridges, because I think I remember reading that the 2600 Plus is compatible with more than just 2600 games. So we're going to see what we can find. A couple of Atari 2600 cartridges that I'm definitely looking for. Keystone Capers. I absolutely love Keystone Capers. That's the one where you are like a police officer and you are trying to catch the criminal before he gets out of the store. For some reason, he's already in a striped suit, so clearly this guy got out of prison and went straight back to robbing department stores instantaneously. Like, he didn't even stop to change his clothes. Another one that I'm looking for that I really enjoyed when I was younger is River Raid. I always was a huge fan of River Raid. Cosmic Arc is another of my favorites, although that's one of the ones that had a really strange shaped cartridge. It wasn't a rectangle like a lot of the other ones. It had like this weird lip, but I don't have mine from when I was a kid. So those are 3 games that I'm definitely hoping to find when I get to the retro game shop, and we'll see what else we can find in addition to that. One thing to keep in mind is, even if I don't find games that I like, I will probably end up spending money on games that have cool art, because that's one thing that you absolutely cannot argue. Even if the Atari 2600 games are terrible, and they are, they have the coolest damn art of any of the consoles. So we are coming up on my exit, and I will see you all when we get to the store. All right, so I just asked the guy, and he brought out a huge bin of games for me to look through. And you check this out, Dolphin. My brother had this when I was a kid, and I don't know if I want it because it's $7, but they're in really good shape. Oh, that's red. That's red. Is that? No. Thought that was River Raid. Oh, look at that, look at that, look at that. Cosmic Arc. That is one of the ones that I was looking for. Heck yes. Well, it occurs to me another one that I would like to find is Enduro. Look, River Raid. My copy of River Raid does not work. That's a maybe. I already have Defender, but look at this. Look at the art on that. It's in really good shape too. What in the hell is this? Revenge of the Beefsteak Tomatoes. Whew, 12 bucks. I'm not that curious. Ooh, Phoenix. It's not in the best shape, but it's only 2 bucks. I think that's a yes. So I just got out of the shop and I was talking to the owner, and he was telling me that one of the games that I picked up actually has like a modern version that has documentaries built in that tell you about how they made the game for every system. And I guess it's on PS5 and stuff. It's called Krakatoa, which I only picked up because I wanted to test on whether or not it would work in the 7800 because it's a 7800 game. We'll find that out when I get home.
Before we put some games in here, let's go ahead and unbox this thing and take a look at the hardware. This looks exactly like the Atari 2600 that I had when I was a kid. I think it was back in 1984. I was living in an apartment with my mom across the street from a golf course, and on the opposite side of the golf course were a series of woods along the right-hand side of the course. So my friends and I would go into the woods, find golf balls, and sell them back to the golfers for 25 cents a piece. After I did this for quite a long time, I saved up 50 bucks and I bought a used 2600 and a big box of games from a friend of my mother's. I don't have those anymore because, you know, garage sales and, you know, you got to sell the old console to get the new console when you're younger. But I do have an Atari 2600 that I ended up picking up at our local game shop that, you know, I don't even know if it works because I don't have a TV that I can hook it up to, but I have one and it's there just for no other reason than nostalgia. Here is the OG 2600 sitting next to its younger, much cooler sibling. You can see here that it is a lot smaller, but it is a really faithful recreation of the original, as everybody called it, Woody Atari from, I believe 1977 is when this thing actually came out. Okay, let's take a look at the games that I found. Some of these games I already had, but the ones in the bag here are the ones that I dug out of the bin at the store. I was lucky enough to find a copy of River Raid, which I'm very excited about. It's one of my favorite games on the Atari 2600, and the copy that I already had didn't work, so that was definitely a good find. I was hoping to find Keystone Capers, but no luck there, but I did find a copy of Cosmic Arc, one of my all-time favorite Atari 2600 games. I'll throw that one up on screen right now so that you can see what that looks like. I was also able to find a copy of Pitfall, which I didn't have before, and this one was a game that my babysitter's brother had, and so whenever I went over to her house, like if my mom was going out or something, I would play Phoenix on their Atari 2600. This game was awesome, and I really, really wished that I had a copy when I was a kid, and now I do. All right, let's try these out in the 2600 Plus. The cool thing about the 2600 Plus is that it has HDMI out, so it's really easy to get hooked up to a modern TV. You don't have to have weird converters or anything. It's just straight up HDMI cable. It also has USB-C power, so it is really easy to set up. It plays both 2600 games and 7800 games. Now, I didn't have a 7800 growing up, so I never actually played one of those before. But a few years ago for Christmas, my wife got me a 7800 for the NerdNest. It's been sitting on the shelf back there because I don't have any way to hook it up. It's cool looking, but now I'm actually going to be able to play some 7800 games. I have Joust with it that she bought along with the console, but yesterday I ended up picking up Food Fight for the 7800 and Karateka for the 7800. There was very, very slim pickings for 7800 cartridges at the store, so we'll see how these turn out. On the front, you have a bunch of physical switches. You've got your power switch, your TV type switch, which will emulate black and white if you want to go really old school. You have your game select and your reset buttons. For some reason, Atari put the controller inputs on the back of the system back in 1978, and they copied that design again here. I love that this thing has working physical switches. It is less like one of those mini consoles and more like a time machine that takes you back to the 80s when I had one of these things. It seems like they went as far as they possibly could in order to replicate what my friends and I experienced back in the 80s on our 2600 consoles. And that's what sets this apart from other mini consoles out there. This is a way cooler way to play some way more terrible games. And while that really sounds bad, I am loving this thing. On the back, we have our difficulty switches, and you can see where the power in and HDMI out go. This switch right here lets you control if the games are in the original 4:3 or 16:9. Now, most of the time when I'm talking about retro games, I prefer to play in the original aspect ratio, or at least as close to the original aspect ratio as possible. So I would have thought that I would have really liked 4:3, but because the graphics of the Atari 2600 are so bad, I mean, they're just blocks, right? Because those blocks are so bad, just stretching them out to fill the screen doesn't actually look too bad. It's not like when you take, Zelda or Mario and stretch it out and it looks terrible. This just looks fine, and I actually prefer to play it without the black bars or the pillar boxes on the left and the right. It has nice rubber feet on the bottom, so it won't move around your table when you're swapping carts, and man, oh man, is this thing covered in sharp corners. Right down here on the front is an Atari logo that lights up when you turn it on. It's very cool. It comes with one of the worst controllers of all time, the CX-40 Joystick, and it feels just like it did back in the 80s. This is a very faithful recreation of the original controller. I read somewhere that it's slightly smaller than the original. I didn't want to dig mine out of storage to find my controller and compare. But when if you hadn't told me that it was slightly smaller, no way I would have been able to tell. This is a really good recreation of a terrible controller. Speaking of the controller, it only comes with one controller, and that's a huge disappointment. I mean, the games that came on the little 10-in-1 cartridge, which I'll talk about in a sec, a bunch of them are multiplayer games, and it even has combat on there, which is a game that you can only play in multiplayer. Like, there is no single player version of combat. The thing that occurs to me is that I feel like somebody in a boardroom somewhere was like, let's make sure we put combat on there and only include one controller, because that will get people who are buying this thing to buy a second controller. Or, on the other hand, maybe they just said, there's so many of these joysticks out there in the world already, we don't need to ship two with it, because chances are you're going to be able to find one fairly easily and cheaply without buying it from us. So a lot of people would probably just use one controller, and the other one would just sit there becoming waste. That cartridge that comes with it has 10 games on it. You can see them right here. And the coolest thing about this is actually on the other side, because what you would think would happen is you would turn on the Atari 2600 and it would bring up a menu. That's not what happens. It shows an Atari logo, and then it boots whatever game happens to be in the actual cartridge slot, whether it's this one or whether it's a copy of Phoenix or whatever. The thing that's really cool about this, it's got 10 games. How do you select your game? Well, on the back, you have dip switches, so you can switch between the different games just by putting in the correct pattern of dip switches on the back of this and then reinserting the cartridge and turning your Atari on. That is really cool, and it makes it feel even more retro, which I love. All right, let's get this thing plugged in and set up, and we can try it out. And one thing I will say is it does not come with a USB adapter so you can like plug it into a wall or something. So you're gonna have to find one of those yourself. I believe it requires 5 volts or 1 amp, just to keep in mind, but I'm sure that you probably have one laying around that you're able to use. Now, it is important that I point out that not every game is going to be compatible with the Atari 2600 Plus. Here is a list from Atari that shows which games work, which ones that they have yet to test, and which ones won't work. I did not buy the paddle controllers, so no games for the paddle controllers will work for me, but if you have the right paddle controllers for them, they should work just fine for you. So why is it that some games are incompatible with the Atari 2600 Plus? You'd think that it was just a 2600 with HDMI out, but it's not. It's actually a Rockchip 3128 SoC with 256 megabytes of DDR3 RAM and 256 megabytes of internal storage. They're using Stella to emulate the 2600, and they're using the Pro system to emulate the 7800. So when you plug a cartridge in, it reads that cartridge, stores the data that it needs into that storage that I mentioned before, and then runs the game from RAM. When you turn it back off, that RAM is cleared out, you put a new cartridge in, and it does the whole thing all over again. Now, one thing that you're going to run into, and I don't necessarily think that this is a fault of the Atari 2600 Plus, I think it's just these are old cartridges that have been beat up, and so a lot of times when I plug games into it, I will get a read error, and it will basically say it cannot load the game. So then I have to turn it off, take it out, reseat it, turn it back on. I might need to go through, I just got back from the store with these, so I might need to go through and use some alcohol and a Q-tip and clean off the contacts in these old games just to see if that will make them more reliable. But almost all of the games that I have put into this thing actually work, and I've had just a few that will say it's not going to work, and that was my copy of River Raid would not load. A few things to keep in mind. 2600 games were notorious for needing instruction manuals in order to know what you're supposed to do. For example, here is Sword Quest Earthworld, and just like the copy that I played when I was a kid, it doesn't have a manual. I have no clue what needs to happen here. I go from room to room, press a button, something happens on screen, but I'm not really sure what. Is this just a bad game? Or would the manual have saved me? I'll never know. Just kidding. I can look it up online. I just haven't bothered yet. But you're going to run into that a lot. And I think it would have been in Atari's best interest to at least have a QR code that you could scan with your phone that would send you to a website for each of the games. I think that would be fairly easy to do. Something else that I would have really liked, that it would have been even, they went above and beyond of making this an authentic experience. They could have shipped for the 10 games that are on this cartridge. They could have shipped along with that manuals for each one of those games, or at least one manual that had the instructions for each one of those games in it. So for example, Haunted House is a game that I loved when I was a kid, and it happens to be one of the ones that's on this cartridge. And there's pieces that you pick up in the haunted house. There's 3 pieces you put together to make an urn, which then you can use to escape, and then you win the game. But there's also this 4th piece, and I couldn't remember what it is. So I went into the internet. I went on the internet, and I looked it up. And I was looking at the manual for that game, and it was talking about what all of the different difficulty switches and game modes do when you set all that stuff before you hit game reset on your controller or on your console. And none of that stuff is stuff that I ever knew when I was a kid. I still enjoyed the game, but if they had included that information with this for these 10 games, I think that it would have gone a long way towards helping people enjoy this, because I'm playing it strictly out of nostalgia. And I can see some people trying it and immediately giving up because, you know, they have so many better games to play these days. So the big question, should you buy the Atari 2600 Plus? Well, first of all, it's $130. So keep that in mind when I say the following. I do think that $130 is too expensive for something like this. Why did I buy it? Because I wanted to make a video about it. But $130 is pretty steep for something like this. That being said, if you're somebody who, you know, grew up with the Atari 2600 and has a lot of nostalgia for those games, if you're somebody who likes to go into a retro game shop and dig through a bin of Atari 2600 or Atari 7800 games and see if you can find the diamond in the rough, because most of those games are bad, then it might actually be for you, because hooking up an old school Atari to any modern equipment is kind of a pain. And I know that you could go and find a CRT, but I mean, those are big, they take up room, and generally people are paying through the nose to get their hands on a CRT just so that they can play these old games. Well, now you can play these old games on modern hardware thanks to the HDMI port on the back of here. So if you actually think that you will spend some time looking for games, picking up something at the store that maybe you'd never heard of, bringing it back, slapping it in that cartridge slot and turning it on and, you know, trying something out, I think that that sounds really cool. It's kind of like an adventure, only hopefully you can carry more than one item at a time. But I certainly don't think that this is for everyone. First off, while I personally have a soft spot for the 2600 as it was the first system that I bought myself, most of the games that are on that system are pretty terrible. There are absolutely a few exceptions to the rule, but most of them are bad, and I think that saying that most of them are bad is being generous. But if you did enjoy the 2600 games and you have no attachments to physical media, then I would say you should just pass on this. You can emulate all of these games on pretty much any device. Here I am playing Cosmic Arc on my Miyoo Mini Plus, which is almost half the price of an Atari 2600 Plus. And if you're not in emulation, there's no shortage of Atari 2600 games included in compilations and retro collections on Steam. So while I still think that this is something that absolutely nobody asked for, I love that they made this because it allows people to play their cartridges on modern TVs without having to jump through hoops. And that is really cool. I hope that companies like Nintendo and Sega and all the other systems that were out there that had cartridges, I hope that those companies make similar items. I don't think that they will, because I think that they would prefer that you rebuy that stuff from them so that they can make some money from it. But I would love to be able to walk into a retro game store, pick up an NES cartridge, bring it home, put it in an official Nintendo Entertainment System that has HDMI out, and play those games. That would be incredibly cool. So I gotta say that this thing, for most people, is like a 2 out of 10. I don't like doing numbered scores, but for most people, I think that this is a 2 out of 10. But if you are the right person, this thing could easily be a 9. And the only thing holding it back, I'm going to say 8, because the only things holding it back are lack of manuals and the fact that it only comes with one controller. But what do you guys think? Is this something that you're even a little interested in, or is the Atari 2600 too old for you? What systems would you like to see with HDMI out? Let me know in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this video, you're probably going to enjoy this video right here. From the Nerd Nest, I'm Bill. Stay rad, everybody.